Another significant entry, of
Absolutely.
course, the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, given the announcement we're expecting to hear later this evening, particularly significant. We'll have to see how he's greeted. But
there is a bilateral coming up on Monday.
That's right, 11th. The state visit. The relationship between India and Saudi Arabia is significant, of course, from an energy perspective, also from a trade perspective.
And there you go. You see him smiling. You know he's seen the Indian Prime Minister. There is that big handshake, hands reaching out to each other.
Got a hug.
And a hug. And a couple of pats on the back as well. Double-handed handshake. Firm handshake, as you can make out. Nearly 4 times they shake each other's hands properly. And he escorts him out further.
What do we know about the state visit plans?
As of now, I think it's scheduled, of course, as soon as G20 gets over. The Prime Minister Modi has had a packed schedule with the ASEAN Summit coming back, leading into the bilateral talks.
He really
and then
has
G20.
been a jet setter.
Yes, exactly. And the man does not get tired. It is very apparent. 11th September, of course, after 10th. And, and that's when the meeting is expected, the bilateral meet. Molly and Siddhant, you both are still there, very much on ground. Of course, you're going to be covering all the biggest developments. Siddhant, I'd like to just come to you. Anything more you observed that we missed out on the screens? Anything more you tell us? Who all else is left to make to the venue, and when do we get to start?
Well, this summit is going to start very soon, in perhaps next 20 minutes. But what I noticed was hug with the Arabs,
yes.
Also smiles with the Europeans and the Americans. I will not say cold handshakes with which country, but yes, the Chinese premier was there and we saw the body language.
Right.
But all in all, it was very interesting to note the dynamics, and we will see more such dynamics as the leaders enter into the plenary hall. They're right now in the holding rooms. Visuals we can't see, but visuals that will be released later on, and visuals that will be telling more in terms of how leaders deal with each other. Remember, I can give you an example in 2019 when MBS, the Crown Prince, was at the G20 Summit after a specific incident which Jessica can talk about in much more detail, which led to relationship between Saudis and the Americans going southwards. Right. After that, nobody was very keen. In fact, the Western leaders were not keen to meet with MBS, and it was Putin who was engaging with MBS the most, and the Indian Prime Minister, that it looks like has changed the geopolitical course as well. There has been increased engagement between Riyadh and Moscow, and Riyadh and New Delhi as well. But all in all, the personal touch of leaders do make an impact in terms of the relationship, the wider relationship, and that personal chemistry between Indian Prime Minister and several Arab leaders is something that has been quite remarkable, given how the relationship has seen a major turnaround when it comes to India, UAE and Saudi Arabia.
I have a question for Molly. I know that you've probably been able to meet some of my Voice of America colleagues there at the press center. But the term Global South, which we've used a ton throughout this broadcast, and I think which is much more familiar perhaps to the Indian audience than to the American audience. Are you finding yourself having any conversations or explaining that term to some of the reporters from outside that vantage point?
It's interesting that you asked that, Jessica, because this very term has a lot of intrigue attached to it, because the voice of the Global South, now that's a term that we've seen being used time and again in the build-up to the G20 Summit, and the kind of emphasis that India has been laying on making the issues and the challenges to do with the so-called Global South heard. Given the varying ways in which this part of the world, this entire bloc is referred to, emerging economies, developing countries, lesser developed countries, and that is the very indication of the variety of challenges that these countries actually are grappling with. Because let's face it, in the run-up to the G20 Summit and throughout the negotiations, and even in that virtual meeting that India had led with those emerging economies and the countries from the bloc, it has focused on the multiple challenges, but the common thread that's been running through those challenges has been that of making their voice heard and ensuring that multilateral forums find more participation from these countries because of the very fact that they are not finding the kind of prominence that they deserve, that they require and also demand, is also resulting in the gap that we are seeing in the demands being met. And that's something that India has very prominently shed a spotlight on. And these conversations that we've been having with fellow journalists also talking about the way in which the term has been used so often in the run-up to the G20 Summit because of the emphasis that India has laid on emerging as a voice of the Global South, but also talking about the contrast in which the bloc is viewed by the other side of the world as well.
Molly, now, you know, while you're there, and there are several journalists which have come from all over the world, is there more conversation with these fellow journalists? What's the buzz regarding the outcomes of the G20 summit, and what's the overall, you know, flavor or masala, like we like to call here in India, in the media house over there, the media room that you are in at the moment?
Well, we've been talking about the very fact that unanimity as far as the joint declaration is a huge challenge. It's a huge question mark, and the uncertainty that comes with finding common ground, specifically on the issue of the Ukraine war. That has been a prominent part of the conversations among the fellow journalists as well, as they closely monitor the statements that have been coming in from the leaders as they've been making their way to the national capital for the G20 Summit. And also now in the bilateral meetings that we will be seeing in a short while from now. As we just discussed, the first session of the summit will be beginning in just a short while. One Earth, which of course talks about the issue of climate change and finding a global resolution when it comes to the issue of climate action, tripling the global renewable energy capacity by the year 2030, weaning away from fossil fuels. Those have been the major focus areas as far as the Indian G20 presidency is concerned, and have been sticking points as well, because let's face it, a lot of question marks have been raised over whether or not countries have been taking the issue of climate change seriously enough, and the responsibility that needs to be shouldered by those who are emitting the most and causing most of those challenges as far as the climate crisis is concerned, which has impacted the vulnerable countries a lot more. So this gap and this desire on part of India to find common ground on this very sticking, on this issue which has been a sticking point, has been a huge challenge, and that also finds a prominent mention in the conversations that we've been having with fellow journalists as well. And just to get you a better idea of where we are, requesting our video journalists to just pan across the International Media Center, where we are seeing media delegations from around the world converge, as I said, dissecting each and every minute of the developments coming out from the G20 Summit, as the world leaders have already arrived at the G20 venue, Bharat Mandapam, which has been called the Culture Corridor, which represents the rich cultural diversity and heritage of India. And this, by the way, is just a sample of the color, the decorations, the mood that we've been witnessing throughout early hours of the morning, and while we were making our way to the media center as well. Bharat Mandapam being the epicenter of where the action is, and the G20 leaders hope to find a resolution to the global challenges of our time. Like we've been discussing, the Indian G20 presidency coming at a very difficult time, seeing the fallout of the Russia-Ukraine war and the divisions that the war has actually caused, and to what extent they actually impact the outcome of the summit.
Molly, stay with us. I'll just cut back to Siddhant. Siddhant, I did notice when the US president was meeting the Indian Prime Minister, All right, I'll stay with you, Molly. I think Siddhant is unable to hear me at the moment. Molly, when when the two leaders were meeting, I did notice how the Indian Prime Minister was showcasing the entire background to their meet and greet, where Vasudev Kutumbakam has also, of course, it's very much there and prominently written. China had a problem with Vasudev Kutumbakam. They wanted their Belt and Road Initiative to also be mentioned if India goes ahead and includes Vasudev Kutumbakam in terms of the documents of the G20. Do you feel BRI will be taking a major hit here at the summit, especially in Xi Jinping's absence? Do you feel a parallel reform being made which kind of undermines the BRI?
Well, the very fact that the Chinese president decided to give the G20 summit a miss has been a prominent part of the discussions that we've been having with fellow journalists here as well. Because let's face it, that's been a very important message that goes out to the world, because it also leaves room for a lot of speculation, for a lot of question marks, given the fact that the Chinese leader, the Chinese president being this is the first G20 summit that he is skipping. In fact, going back to the time of Hu Jintao, this is the first time that a Chinese leader has actually skipped a G20 summit. So that in itself says a lot. Now, talking about the various issues that have led to China, the Chinese president giving this summit a miss, and the Chinese premier.
Molly, we're cutting across.
आए भूकंप से प्रभावित लोगों के प्रति मैं अपनी हार्दिक संवेदना प्रकट करना चाहता हूं। हम प्रार्थना करते हैं कि सभी इंजर्ड लोग शीघ्र स्वस्थ हो। इस कठिन समय में पूरा विश्व समुदाय मोरक्को के साथ है और हम उन्हें हर संभव सहायता पहुंचाने के लिए तैयार हैं। Your Highnesses, Excellencies, G20 के प्रेसिडेंट के तौर पर भारत आप सभी का हार्दिक स्वागत करता है। इस समय जिस स्थान पर हम एकत्रित हैं, यहां से कुछ ही किलोमीटर के फासले पर लगभग 2500 साल पुराना एक स्तंभ लगा हुआ है। इस स्तंभ पर प्राकृत भाषा में लिखा है, हेवम लोकसा हित मुखेति अथ इयम नातिसु हेवम, अर्थात मानवता का कल्याण और सुख सदैव सुनिश्चित किया जाए। 2500 साल पहले भारत की भूमि ने यह संदेश पूरे विश्व को दिया था। आइए इस संदेश को याद कर इस G20 समिट का हम आरंभ करें। 21वीं सदी का यह समय पूरी दुनिया को नई दिशा दिखाने वाला और नई दिशा देने वाला एक महत्वपूर्ण समय है। ये वो समय है जब बरसों पुरानी चुनौतियां हमसे नए समाधान मांग रही हैं और इसलिए हमें ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक अप्रोच के साथ अपने हर दायित्व को निभाते हुए ही आगे बढ़ना है। फ्रेंड्स, कोविड-19 के बाद विश्व में एक बहुत बड़ा संकट विश्वास के अभाव का आया है। युद्ध ने इस ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट को और गहरा किया है। जब हम कोविड को हरा सकते हैं तो हम आपसी विश्वास पर आए इस संकट पर भी विजय प्राप्त कर सकते हैं। आज G20 के प्रेसिडेंट के तौर पर भारत पूरी दुनिया का आह्वान करता है कि हम मिलकर सबसे पहले इस ग्लोबल ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट को एक विश्वास, एक भरोसे में बदलें। यह हम सभी के साथ मिलकर चलने का समय है और इसलिए सबका साथ, सबका विकास, सबका विश्वास, सबका प्रयास का मंत्र हम सभी के लिए एक पथ प्रदर्शक बन सकता है। वैश्विक अर्थव्यवस्था में उथल-पुथल हो, नॉर्थ और साउथ का डिवाइड हो, ईस्ट और वेस्ट की दूरी हो, फूड, फ्यूल और फर्टिलाइजर का मैनेजमेंट हो, टेररिज्म और साइबर सिक्योरिटी हो, हेल्थ, एनर्जी और वाटर सिक्योरिटी हो, वर्तमान के साथ ही आने वाली पीढ़ियों के लिए हमें इन चुनौतियों के ठोस समाधान की तरफ बढ़ना ही होगा। फ्रेंड्स, भारत की G20 प्रेसिडेंसी देश के भीतर और देश के बाहर इंक्लूजन का, सबका साथ का प्रतीक बन गई है। भारत में ये पीपल्स G20 बन गया। करोड़ों भारतीय इससे जुड़े। देश के 60 से ज्यादा शहरों में 200 से ज्यादा अधिक बैठकें हुई। सबका साथ की भावना से ही भारत ने प्रस्ताव रखा था कि अफ्रीकन यूनियन को G20 की स्थायी सदस्यता दी जाए। मेरा विश्वास है कि इस प्रस्ताव पर हम सबकी सहमति है। आप सबकी सहमति से आगे की कार्रवाई शुरू करने से पहले मैं अफ्रीकन यूनियन के अध्यक्ष को G20 के स्थायी सदस्य के रूप में अपना स्थान ग्रहण करने के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं। एक्सेलेंसी, इसके साथ ही मैं मीडिया के साथियों से भी विनम्र आग्रह करूंगा कि वे अब हमें समय दें